They said it was impossible, that a child's wild imagination could never conjure real terror. Yet on that sweltering August night, when the cicadas droned like a funeral dirge, something unspeakable began in the old brick house on Hawthorne Lane. 11-year-old MIA had always been perceptive, perhaps too much for a child who lived in a quiet suburb, where every creak and whisper of the wind was safely tucked away in the mundane rhythm of daily life. That summer, though, the ordinary became dangerously extraordinary. It started with the dog, Bruno, a loyal, scruffy mutt whose eyes had always flickered with a strange intensity when he sensed trouble. One humid evening, as twilight bled slowly into darkness, MIA was playing in her small, cluttered bedroom when Bruno began to growl low in his throat. His fur bristled, and he trotted over to the narrow gap beneath the living room wall. There, with his nose almost pressed against the cold brick, he let out a warning bark that shattered the silence. Mia's heart pounded as she crept out of her room. Her parents were downstairs, discussing dinner, their voices calm and unsuspecting. "What is it, Bruno?" she whispered, following the dog into the dimly lit corridor. Bruno continued his insistent growl, his gaze fixed on the gap in the wall, a gap that had always been nothing more than a seam between the wallpaper and the old mortar. But tonight, it seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. For days after that unsettling moment, MIA insisted that Bruno was trying to tell her something. "The dog warned me," she would murmur softly, her eyes wide with a blend of fear and fascination, about the man in the walls. Her parents, burdened by the weight of adult pragmatism, dismissed her words as mere fantasy. They told her it was just the echo of her imagination, a product of too many spooky bedtime stories. But Mia's eyes, as clear as the autumn sky before a storm, betrayed a truth that her words could not contain. In the following week, small incidents began to accumulate like the slow drip of water carving stone. At first, it was the persistent scratching sound, a faint, almost inaudible tapping that seemed to come from behind the walls. In the kitchen, while her mother prepared dinner, MIA paused mid-stir, listening as the sound morphed into a relentless rhythm. In the living room, her father frowned at the rhythmic scraping that interrupted his evening paper. Even Bruno, usually calm and steady, paced near the baseboards with his hackles raised. Yet every time MIA tried to convey her worries, her parents brushed it off with a patient smile, attributing the noises to the settling of the old house. One particularly oppressive evening, when the summer heat clung to every surface like an unwelcome guest, MIA found herself alone in the living room after her parents had retired for the night. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and old wood, and the only light came from a flickering lamp that cast jittery shadows on the walls. As she sat on the threadbare couch, the scratching resumed, louder this time, insistent and punctuated by occasional pauses that made her pulse quicken. The sound was not random, it had a pattern, a deliberate cadence that seemed almost to be speaking. Mia's eyes darted around the room, and she realized that the noise emanated from a part of the wall that had always been slightly ajar, as if harboring a secret. Her mind raced with unsettling possibilities. Could there really be a man living behind the walls? The thought was absurd by daylight standards, yet tonight, fueled by the primal terror of isolation and darkness, it seemed disturbingly plausible. With trembling fingers, she crept closer to the wall. The rough texture of the plaster under her fingertips sent shivers down her spine. Every detail, the sound of her own breath, the faint odor of damp concrete, the almost imperceptible shifting of the wall, melded into a moment of paralyzing dread. Outside, the world carried on in ignorant normalcy. The front yard, bordered by a scraggly hedge and an ancient oak tree, appeared serene and unchanging, as if nothing could disturb its pastoral peace. Yet inside, behind the secure facade of familial routine, an insidious presence stirred. Mia's eyes locked on the tiny gap again, and in that charged moment, she remembered Bruno's earlier warning, the way his eyes had locked onto that same slit in the wall. It was as if the dog had seen something no one else could, an unseen inhabitant, lurking in a place where light dared not reach. The following morning brought little relief. The golden rays of dawn filtered through lace curtains in the modest dining room, where breakfast was served in clinking cups and murmured conversation. MIA sat quietly at the table, her fork pausing mid-air as she listened for any trace of the night's horrors. Her parents' casual chatter about the upcoming week only deepened her isolation. They were wrapped in a cocoon of routine, blissfully unaware of the creeping dread that had taken root in their home. Even Bruno seemed subdued, his tail hanging low, as if mourning the loss of a secret he could no longer guard. Throughout that day, subtle anomalies began to coalesce. In the hallway, a draft whispered through cracks in the old wood, and in the bathroom mirror, Mia swore she saw a fleeting reflection, a shadow that wasn't her own. She tried to dismiss these as tricks of the light, yet each time, Bruno's cautious behavior confirmed her growing suspicions. As dusk fell again, the relentless scratching returned, more insistent than before, echoing through the silent corridors of the house. It was a sound that could easily be mistaken for the harmless scuttle of rodents, yet its rhythm was almost deliberate, as if calling out a warning. Mia's world had become a battleground between reason and an irrational terror that clung to her like a second skin. At school, she was a quiet girl, her normally bright eyes shadowed by a persistent worry. Her teachers mentioned nothing of the disturbances at home, and her classmates were absorbed in their own childish dramas. But every night, as the darkness pooled in the corners of her room, Mia could not shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching, waiting in the oppressive silence between heartbeats. In the small, weathered backyard behind the house, where a rickety swing set creaked in the wind and a long-forgotten garden lay in disarray, a different kind of stillness reigned. The yard had once been a place of carefree laughter and summer picnics, but now it seemed to harbor a secret of its own. Shadows lengthened unnaturally at dusk, and the gnarled branches of the old oak stretched out like skeletal fingers, as if trying to ensnare unwary souls. It was here that Mia sometimes retreated, seeking solace in the open air, even as her thoughts turned increasingly inward, consumed by the fear that had infiltrated every aspect of her life. Inside the house, the boundary between safety and menace blurred. The one familiar place, a worn, inviting armchair in the living room where her mother once read bedtime stories, now served as a silent witness to the mounting terror. Mia's parents, though caring and rational, were beginning to notice the small, inexplicable changes, the odd stains on the wallpaper, the faint but persistent odor of damp decay that seemed to emanate from the walls, and Bruno's increasingly frantic behavior. Yet every time they attempted to investigate, the evidence evaporated like morning mist, leaving only the lingering sense of an unseen presence. On one particularly oppressive night, when the wind howled outside like a wounded animal, the scratching reached a fever pitch. Mia lay awake in her narrow bed, the thin sheets barely offering warmth against the chill that seeped through the old house's bones. Her eyes darted around the darkened room as the sound intensified, punctuated by irregular pauses that seemed to mimic a slow, calculated rhythm. It was in that moment of profound isolation that she made a decision. No longer would she allow the dismissals of her parents or the placid normalcy of the day to quiet her fears. With a resolve born of desperation, she rose, her bare feet padding silently on the cool wooden floor, and made her way toward the source of the relentless scratching. Her small hand reached for the cold, rough plaster, and she pressed it against the gap in the wall. In that instant, she felt a vibration, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor that sent shivers racing through her entire body. It was as if the wall itself were alive, breathing a dark, ancient secret that had been hidden away for too long. In the muted glow of the night, every detail stood out in stark relief, the coarse texture of the bricks, the faint glimmer of moisture on the surface, and the echo of Bruno's low, warning growl behind her. At that moment, the line between imagination and reality dissolved. The house, once a sanctuary of routine and comfort, transformed into a labyrinth of unsettling sounds and shadowy figures. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the wind outside, seemed to converge into a single, overwhelming sensation that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Mia's heart pounded in her ears as she withdrew her hand, as if it had touched a forbidden truth. The scratching receded, leaving behind a deafening silence that was even more terrifying than the noise. As the night deepened, the oppressive atmosphere in the house only grew thicker. In the darkness, every object took on a sinister cast, a painting on the wall, a faded rug on the floor, even the clock on the mantel, whose slow, measured ticking now seemed to mock the frantic pace of Mia's thoughts. In that timeless moment, the house itself became a character, a silent conspirator in a mystery that defied logic and reason. For Mia, the events of that night were a turning point, a moment when the comfortable boundaries of her world shattered, leaving her exposed to a reality far more complex and terrifying than any nightmare. There was no escaping the truth. The warnings of her faithful companion, Bruno, had been real, and the mysterious scratching was only the prelude to something far more disturbing. In the days that followed, subtle signs of decay and neglect began to mar the once cherished corners of the house. The living room's wallpaper, once a cheerful pattern of faded florals, now sported dark streaks that seemed almost to writhe in the half-light. The kitchen, where laughter and the clatter of dishes had been a constant accompaniment to family meals, became eerily silent, the normal hum of appliances overshadowed by the soft, persistent tapping of unseen fingers. Even the backyard, with its overgrown grass and broken fence, took on an air of abandonment, as if nature itself were recoiling from the unknown terror that had seeped into every crevice. Mia's parents, caught between the mundane responsibilities of daily life and the unsettling changes creeping into their home, began to argue in hushed tones about what could be done. They reassured themselves with pragmatic explanations: aging infrastructure, moisture seeping in, perhaps even the work of mischievous local vandals. Yet, as they exchanged worried glances over their evening tea, it was clear that a silent dread had taken root in their hearts. Even Bruno, who had always been the unspoken guardian of the household, now watched every movement with a look of deep, inexplicable sorrow. Though the scratching had subsided into a background murmur for a time, the lingering feeling of being watched never left MIA. Each creak of the floor, each whisper of the wind through the eaves, triggered a cascade of memories: the trembling in her hands as she first encountered the gap in the wall, the heavy silence that had followed Bruno's warning barks, the suffocating dread that had filled the air. It was as if the house itself had become a living repository of her darkest fears, a place where the boundary between the seen and the unseen had been irrevocably blurred. And so, as the weeks wore on, the story of the man in the walls took root not only in the fragile mind of a child, but in the very fabric of the home itself. The ordinary had given way to an undercurrent of unease, a palpable tension that simmered just beneath the surface of everyday life. Every shadow held a secret, every whisper of the wind a hidden warning. In the interplay of light and darkness, the home transformed into a stage for a quiet, relentless drama, a drama that would soon reveal that the true horror was not born of ghosts or phantasms, but of a reality far more unsettling and all too human. Mia's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and determination, betrayed a wisdom beyond her years. She had learned that sometimes the world held truths that defied easy explanation, that the most profound warnings could come from the most unassuming sources. And even as she felt the crushing weight of isolation and disbelief from those around her, she knew deep down that she was on the brink of uncovering something that would shatter every illusion of safety she had ever known. That night, as the wind howled once more and the old house groaned under the pressure of secrets long buried, MIA resolved to seek the truth behind the eerie scratching, a truth that would force her to confront not only the shadows within the walls but also the darker recesses of her own heart. In the silence of that stifling darkness, with only Bruno's low, mournful growl for company, the fragile boundary between childhood innocence and the encroaching spectre of dread faded away, leaving behind only the raw, unfiltered pulse of fear. In that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. That night's resolve echoed in Mia's mind as dawn crept over the horizon with a deceptive calm. The pale light revealed a house still shrouded in secrets, its familiar corners now steeped in a quiet dread. In the early hours, the normalcy of breakfast, a soft clink of porcelain and murmured greetings at the table, felt brittle and insubstantial, as if the ordinary was merely a fragile facade hiding something far more sinister. MIA sat at the table with her untouched cereal, her gaze fixed on the window where the first rays of sun attempted to dispel the shadows of last night. But the morning held no promise of comfort. Even as her parents exchanged casual plans for the day, Mia's thoughts churned with the weight of what she had felt against the cold plaster. That subtle vibration, the quiet pulse of the wall, haunted her like an unanswered question. Later that day, as the house settled into its afternoon lull, MIA found herself drawn once again to the living room. Bruno, whose earlier bravado had given way to a nervous pacing, waited near the gap in the wall as if expecting her. The gap itself, a narrow slit between the peeling wallpaper and the weathered brick, seemed to breathe with life, a muted invitation to explore a mystery that defied the comforting banality of her everyday world. With a cautious determination, MIA approached the wall. She leaned in, her small fingers tracing the uneven surface as memories of the previous night's trembling receded into the background hum of her thoughts. Every detail was magnified: the cool texture of the mortar, the faint odor of damp decay that mingled with the lingering aroma of breakfast, and the persistent, rhythmic scratching that had resumed in subtle intervals. It was as though the wall was speaking, urging her to listen more intently to its cryptic message. As she examined the wall, she noticed something peculiar: a barely visible seam, a line that deviated from the expected uniformity of the bricks. The pattern was inconsistent, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal something behind the facade of ordinary construction. Her heart pounded as she pressed her ear to the surface. In the silence of the afternoon, overlaid with the distant sounds of traffic and a neighbor's dog barking, the sound of scraping emerged once more, a slow, calculated cadence that sent chills down her spine. Mia's mind raced with possibilities. Was it simply the sound of old pipe settling, or had the scratching taken on a more deliberate, almost human quality? Every instinct told her that there was more to this than mere structural quirks. Despite the rational explanations her parents had offered, an inner voice urged her to dig deeper. She recalled the way Bruno's eyes had fixed on that very gap with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if the loyal dog knew the truth of what lurked behind. That evening, while her parents busied themselves with the mundane tasks of dinner preparation, Mia slipped into the corridor with Bruno trailing close behind. In the muted light of the setting sun, the house seemed transformed. The once comforting walls now loomed like silent sentinels, each crack and crevice a potential doorway to a hidden reality. In the kitchen, the gentle hum of the refrigerator contrasted starkly with the tension that called in the air like a living thing. As she moved, the floorboards creaked in protest under her cautious steps, and even the soft murmur of the water running from the tap took on an eerie resonance. Her small hand reached for a screwdriver left on a cluttered countertop, a tool that now represented her desperate need for answers. With trembling precision, she returned to the corridor and knelt before the gap in the wall. Bruno circled her like a silent guardian as she carefully inserted the tip of the screwdriver into a loose brick, testing for any sign of give. The brick shifted just enough to reveal a narrow opening, a darkened cavity that stretched deeper than she had ever imagined. In that split second, the ordinary collided with the extraordinary, and the reality of her fears crystallized. The opening exhaled a faint, musty breath, a chill that seemed to emanate from the very bowels of the house. Mia's heart raced as she contemplated the implications. Could someone truly be hiding behind the walls? The notion, as preposterous as it seemed in the light of day, was now as palpable as the cool air that brushed against her skin. The sound of the scratching, once a background murmur, had become an unignorable summons, urging her to confront the hidden truth. In the following days, a palpable shift took root in the household. The silence that had once been a comforting backdrop was now punctuated by irregular, almost deliberate noises. In the living room, the creak of the floorboards took on a measured cadence, while in the kitchen, the soft hum of the appliances was intermittently interrupted by a scraping sound that defied logical explanation. Bruno's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would fix his gaze on a wall for long, unnerving minutes before retreating to a corner, his tail stiff and his eyes wide with a silent alarm. Mia, now more determined than ever, began her own clandestine investigation. Every spare moment was dedicated to scrutinizing the subtle irregularities of the house. She mapped the contours of the gap, noting its dimensions and the curious pattern of scratches that marred its surface. At school, her thoughts wandered back to the hidden opening, and though she tried to focus on the mundane chatter of her classmates, an undercurrent of dread pervaded her day. In class, the teacher's words blurred into the background, overshadowed by her internal urgency to unlock the secret behind the wall. One humid afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the dust motes in the living room, Mia's opportunity presented itself again. With the house ostensibly silent and her parents distracted by a heated conversation about a minor repair, she returned to the corridor. This time, the gap in the wall beckoned her like a dark portal. Gathering her courage, she pressed her hand against the rough surface once more and listened intently. The scraping had grown slightly louder, a steady, rhythmic tapping that seemed to coincide with her own racing heartbeat. A sudden noise from the adjacent room, the soft clatter of a dropped utensil, broke her concentration, and she spun around in alarm. Her parents were there, faces etched with concern over trivial matters, oblivious to the mounting terror in the corridor. Their indifference, a product of adult skepticism and routine, only deepened the isolation Mia felt. She yearned for someone to believe her, to recognize that the signs were not the product of an overactive imagination, but the harbingers of a hidden presence. That night, sleep eluded her. Lying in the narrow confines of her bed, Mia's mind replayed the events of the day in relentless detail. Every sound, every flicker of movement, was scrutinized with a heightened sense of dread. The once familiar creaks of the house now served as sinister reminders of what she had discovered. In the dark, the gentle rustling of the curtains took on the semblance of whispered conversations, and the soft ticking of the clock resonated like a Morse code transmitting an urgent message of warning. In a bid to reclaim some semblance of control, Mia resolved to document everything. With a battered notebook and a stub of a pencil, she recorded every detail: the exact time the scratching intensified, the temperature of the air near the wall, even the subtle shift in Bruno's behavior. Each note was a fragment of a puzzle that she believed, if assembled correctly, would reveal the hidden truth. The act of writing, though tinged with fear, became a cathartic exercise, a way to anchor herself in a reality that was slipping into the unknown. Over the next few days, the scratching evolved from a mere background noise to a persistent reminder of a secret lurking just beyond sight. Her parents' dismissals grew more frequent, their busy lives leaving little room to entertain what they assumed were childish fantasies. Yet, as the evidence mounted, a misaligned brick here, an inexplicable draft there, the growing unease became impossible to ignore. The house, in its quiet decay, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that a truth was on the verge of being uncovered. In the oppressive stillness of the early morning, when the world outside had not yet stirred, Mia found herself drawn back to the corridor. Bruno led her with an urgency that silenced her doubts. The dog's alert stance and the quick, darting glances he cast toward the wall were unmistakable signals of alarm. With her heart pounding in her chest, Mia retrieved the screwdriver and returned to the gap. This time, she carefully removed a few more bricks from the perimeter of the opening, expanding her view into the hidden space. What she saw in the dim light made her blood run cold, a narrow, dusty passage that extended behind the wall, its depth swallowed by shadows and neglect. The passage was lined with old, crumbling insulation and forgotten remnants of a bygone era. It was a place that time had seemingly abandoned, yet its existence was now inextricably linked to the everyday life of the house. The evidence suggested that someone had once carved out a secret niche here, a space deliberately concealed behind layers of brick and mortar. The realization was as staggering as it was disturbing. The hidden room was not the product of a supernatural curse, but a deliberate act of concealment, an intrusion into the sanctity of a family home that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Mia's discovery reverberated through her like a shockwave, shaking the foundations of everything she had known. The mundane became menacing in its silence, and the gentle, familiar hum of the house transformed into a chorus of latent secrets. Each creak, each flicker of light, carried with it an unspoken promise that the truth was still there, waiting to be unraveled. Yet with every step closer to the mystery, a new layer of isolation enveloped her. At school, her attempts to discuss what she had found were met with polite disinterest or the sympathetic but dismissive nods of teachers who preferred the rational to the irrational. In the safety of the classroom, the day's lessons felt both trivial and irrelevant, overshadowed by the ominous reality of that hidden passageway. Her classmates, immersed in the simplicity of their own lives, remained oblivious to the silent terror that had invaded Mia's world. Even Bruno, ever the silent sentinel, seemed to sense that their secret was a fragile line between safety and chaos. The dog's once unwavering confidence had given way to an anxious vigilance that permeated every moment he spent near the forbidden wall. His low, constant growls and the way he refused to venture too far from Mia spoke of an instinctual knowledge that something was deeply amiss. In the hush of that night, with the wind whispering against the eaves and the walls groaning under the weight of untold stories, Mia stood at the threshold of a truth that threatened to unravel the very fabric of her family's life. The hidden passage was a gateway not only to a concealed space within the house, but also to the darker recesses of a past that someone had desperately tried to keep buried. The scratching, the shifting bricks, and the cold drafts were all part of a narrative that demanded to be heard, a narrative that was as human and flawed as it was chilling in its implications. With each passing day, the divide between the seen and unseen narrowed. The house, with all its familiar corners and long-held memories, was transforming into a tapestry woven with threads of hidden horror and quiet despair. And at the center of it all, MIA felt an inexorable pull, a need to peel back the layers of secrecy until the truth, however terrifying, could no longer be ignored. Standing there, in the dim glow of a flickering hallway light, MIA knew that the road ahead would demand courage far beyond her years. Every detail she noted, every scrap of evidence she uncovered, was a step closer to understanding the dark secret that had haunted her home. And though her parents remained blind to the creeping menace, her resolve only hardened. The hidden passage was a tangible marker of betrayal, a relic of a past that had invaded the present and threatened the safety of everything she held dear. In that heavy silence, punctuated only by the soft, persistent tapping of a concealed presence, the quiet war between fear and truth waged on. MIA, guided by a mixture of youthful determination and the raw instinct of survival, was ready to follow the trail of clues wherever it might lead. The very walls of the house, once symbols of familial comfort, had now become cryptic narrators of a story that demanded to be told, one that was as disturbing as it was real. And so, as twilight fell once more, casting long, sinister shadows across the familiar rooms, MIA took a final, resolute breath. With Bruno at her side and the hidden passage yawning before her, she stepped into the unknown. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through broken window panes, bore witness to the unfolding of a mystery that was both heartbreakingly human and terrifyingly inescapable. In that quiet defiance, she embraced the perilous journey ahead, determined to uncover the truth that lay hidden behind the walls, a truth that would shatter the illusions of safety and forever alter the course of her life. Mia's small form pressed against the threshold of the hidden passage, and with a deep, steadying breath, she stepped forward. The passage was narrow and unyielding, a claustrophobic corridor carved out of time and neglect. Dust swirled in the dim light that managed to seep through a crack high above, creating spectral patterns on the damp, time-worn bricks. Every step she took stirred up memories of the house's silent, hidden past, each footfall resonating like a whispered secret in the suffocating darkness. Her heart pounded with the raw intensity of discovery, yet there was no room for retreat. The unknown beckoned her deeper. The air was thick with the scent of mold and old paper, a tangible reminder that the space behind the wall was a forgotten relic of an era long past. Mia's small hand gripped the screwdriver like a talisman, a single connection to the familiar world from which she had just departed. Bruno followed close behind, his low, anxious growl a steady counterpoint to the hushed echoes of her cautious steps. The passage eventually opened into a modest, cramped room whose boundaries were blurred by years of neglect. Here, scattered remnants of a life once hidden lay in disarray, faded newspapers yellowed with age, a tangle of brittle photographs, and a thin layer of dust that blanketed everything like a shroud. Every object was an artifact, a silent witness to stories that had long been stifled by time. The light that filtered in from a grimy, high window was enough to reveal outlines, a small table, a rusted filing cabinet, and, most striking of all, a half-buried diary bound in cracked leather. MIA moved slowly, her gaze flitting from one relic to another, as if each held the key to understanding the mystery that had invaded her home. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of lingering sorrow and abandonment, as though the room itself mourned the loss of its forgotten inhabitant. The diary, its cover etched with a name that had faded into obscurity, called out to her with a silent urgency. Every scratch and stain on its surface spoke of long nights filled with quiet desperation, of secrets so heavy they had been locked away behind these walls. She gingerly picked up the diary, its brittle pages trembling beneath her touch. The faded handwriting inside was meticulous yet laden with an undercurrent of fear and regret. It chronicled days when the room had been a safe haven for someone whose life had been reduced to whispers and hidden glances, a person who had, for reasons that now blurred between caution and terror, retreated into this secret sanctuary. The entry spoke of a man burdened by unspeakable truths, of shadows that crept closer with every passing hour, and of a profound loneliness that had driven him to isolate himself from a world that seemed to have no place for his truths. As MIA read, the room's oppressive silence deepened. The weight of the words pressed against her, echoing the silent groans of the old building as if the walls themselves were lamenting the years of seclusion. She could almost hear the soft cadence of the man's voice, recounting details of everyday life turned upside down, a life marked by subtle intrusions and quiet alarms, much like the persistent scratching that had first drawn her here. The diary was a map of hidden fears, its every line a stepping stone into the labyrinth of human isolation and despair. Outside the cramped room, the rest of the house carried on with its daily charade of normality. The unsuspecting hum of the kitchen, the casual laughter during dinner, and the steady cadence of routine belied the turbulent secrets that now lurked in the shadows of the hidden chamber. Inside, however, the air was thick with the residue of past sorrows and unspoken confessions. The room had once been a refuge, a desperate attempt to escape a reality that had become unbearable. Now, it served as a stark reminder that even the most mundane lives could hide profound, unsettling stories beneath the surface. Mia's discovery was not just a physical one, it was a collision of her own innocence with the bitter, stark reality of hidden lives. In the diary, she found descriptions of daily struggles that mirrored her own quiet battles against the dismissive skepticism of her parents. Each entry resonated with a raw, unfiltered emotional intensity that both comforted and alarmed her. It was as if the man who had penned these words understood the silent terror of feeling unheard, of being trapped in a life where every creak in the night carried the weight of an unspoken warning. The room's stillness was suddenly punctuated by a sound, a soft, shuffling noise, almost imperceptible at first. Mia's heart skipped a beat, and her eyes darted toward the far corner, where shadows coalesced into a darker, more solid form. Bruno's ears pricked up, and he let out a low, warning growl that vibrated in the quiet. The sound was not entirely unfamiliar, it was the same measured tapping that had haunted the corridors of the house, now rendered even more ominous in this forgotten space. For a long, agonizing moment, Mia stood frozen between the relics of a hidden past and the encroaching present. The subtle movement in the shadows was too deliberate to be dismissed as a trick of the light, and it hinted at a presence that defied simple explanation. The room, already laden with sorrow and secrets, seemed to pulse with the quiet urgency of something, or someone, still clinging to the edges of existence. Her mind raced with questions. Who was the man behind the diary? What had driven him to seclusion, and why had his presence remained concealed for so long? The room was a silent confession, each object a muted testament to the struggles and fears that had defined his days. As Mia's eyes met the somber remnants of his life, she realized that the mystery was not one of the supernatural, but of a human soul so overwhelmed by despair that he had chosen isolation as both shield and prison. A sudden, almost imperceptible creak echoed from somewhere within the labyrinth of the hidden space, a reminder that the passage between the visible and the concealed was fraught with dangers. Mia clutched the diary tighter, its presence a fragile connection to the unknown author whose voice transcended the years. With every tremulous breath, the reality of the moment grew heavier, a stark blend of childhood innocence confronted with the raw, unyielding truth of human isolation and fear. Determined to piece together the fragmented narrative left behind, Mia carefully examined the rest of the room. In one corner, behind a pile of decaying boxes, she discovered a small collection of personal mementos, a tarnished wristwatch, a faded photograph of a family whose smiles had long since dissolved into oblivion, and a neatly folded letter that had been tucked away like a secret confession. Each item carried its own burden of memory, a silent echo of a life that had once dared to hope in a world that had ultimately betrayed it. As she gathered these remnants with the careful reverence of someone uncovering a hidden truth, a profound sense of empathy washed over her. Here was a life lived in quiet desperation, its painful beauty etched in every fragile detail. The hidden room was not merely a repository of forgotten objects, but a sanctuary for the memories of a person whose existence had been reduced to whispers and hidden warnings. In that moment, Mia understood that the persistent scratching and the concealed passages were not the work of phantoms or imagined horrors, but of a real, human history, one that spoke of isolation, neglect, and the desperate need to be seen. The discovery stirred something deep within her, a resolve that mixed dread with a fierce determination to uncover every piece of the puzzle. The quiet war between the comfort of normalcy and the intrusion of harsh, unvarnished truth was a struggle that was all too real, echoing in the unsteady beat of her heart and the silent vigil of the old house. MIA knew that what she had found was only the beginning of a long, arduous journey, a journey into the forgotten corners of human existence, where every creak of the floorboard and every rustle of old paper was a clue, a piece of a narrative that demanded to be understood. In the oppressive silence of that hidden chamber, the ordinary world outside seemed like a distant memory. The contrast between the bright, sunlit rooms of her family home and the somber, shadowed reality of the secret room was as stark as day and night. And yet, in this interplay of light and darkness, of forgotten memories and present fears, MIA found a strange kinship, a shared understanding of what it meant to hide parts of oneself away, to keep secrets buried beneath the surface. With the diary pressed close to her heart, MIA took one last look around the room. The objects, though silent, seemed to speak to her in a language of sorrow and quiet resilience. As she retraced her steps back through the narrow passage, the weight of her discovery lingered like a shadow, inescapable and all-encompassing. The house, with its familiar rooms now tainted by the echoes of hidden lives, stood as a silent testament to the lives that had been swallowed by time and secrecy. Emerging from the passage, Mia's eyes brimmed with a mixture of fear and determination. The secret room had not just revealed the past, it had awakened in her an urgent need to understand the deeper truths that lay beneath the veneer of everyday life. In the weeks that followed, every unexplained creak, every stray whisper of wind through the corridors, would serve as a reminder that the boundaries between what was known and what was hidden were far more fragile than she had ever imagined. As twilight draped the house in its familiar, yet now unsettling, embrace, MIA realized that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet armed with the tangible evidence of a life once confined to shadows, she felt a stirring resolve, a determination to honor the silent testimony of the forgotten and to confront the mysteries that lay hidden behind the walls. The ordinary world outside, with its predictable rhythms, could no longer offer the comfort of certainty. Every new discovery would demand that she face not only the external truths of the home, but also the unsettling, internal truths about the nature of isolation, neglect, and the quiet, relentless toll of time. And so, with the diary tucked safely in her arms and Bruno ever at her side, MIA stepped back into the familiar corridors of her home, a space now irrevocably transformed by the dark secrets of a hidden past. The rhythmic tapping that had haunted her nights was a constant reminder that the truth was still waiting, lurking behind every crevice, eager to be unveiled. With each step forward, the gap between the known and the unknown narrowed, pulling her deeper into a mystery that was as much about human frailty as it was about the secret lives hidden within the walls. In that charged atmosphere of converging fears and fragile hope, Mia's journey had only just begun. The hidden room had opened a door, a passage not only into the dark recesses of the old house, but into the intricate, often painful, labyrinth of the human heart. And as the evening deepened into night, the soft hum of the house merged with the whispered echoes of the past, carrying with it the promise that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, would one day be brought to light. The following morning arrived with a dull, oppressive quiet that felt unnatural, like the house was holding its breath. MIA barely slept. The hours had passed in a haze of half-conscious images, the man's hollow face from the photograph, the scrawled words from the diary, the scratching sounds that now seemed to come from more than one place at once. By now, her parents were no longer pretending everything was fine. Her father had given up trying to reassure anyone. Her mother stopped arguing with him about it, too. They had all heard the noises, scraping, dragging sounds moving through the walls, not every night, but often enough that everyone now avoided certain corners of the house. Bruno refused to enter the living room. He'd just stop cold in the doorway and growl low and steady, eyes fixed on the northeast wall. The same wall behind which MIA had found the hidden door. There was no more pretending. Whatever was happening wasn't just the pipes. After breakfast, silent except for the occasional clink of spoon on ceramic, her father announced he was going to deal with the crawl space. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. MIA knew what he meant. He came back an hour later, white-faced and covered in dust, his hands shaking. "Call someone," was all he said to her mother. "Call someone." He wouldn't speak for hours. That night, MIA woke to Bruno barking. Not growling, not whining, barking. Sharp, panic bursts. She shot upright, adrenaline lighting up her body like a flare. The barking was coming from downstairs, near the living room. Then it stopped. All at once. The silence that followed was suffocating. She got up, not even bothering to put on shoes. Just crept barefoot through the hall, each step unbearably loud on the old wooden floor. As she reached the top of the stairs, she saw him, her father, standing at the base of the staircase, pale as wax, staring at the wall. The northeast wall. He didn't move, didn't speak. She called to him, "Dad?" And he barely turned his head. "There's something inside," he said. That's when she heard it again. Not scratching this time, something heavier. A thud. Then another. Rhythmic. Deliberate. She felt her knees weaken. Her father looked at her then, eyes red-rimmed. "We opened the wall." "What?" she whispered. "In the crawl space. It's not a wall. It's a hollow. A false back." They called a contractor that night. The man agreed to come in the morning and take a look. He didn't sound thrilled about it. He arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. Didn't even drink the coffee her mom offered. Just marched to the crawl space and began to work. MIA sat on the stairs with Bruno at her feet, shaking as the sound of tools echoed through the house. She could hear the guy muttering under his breath. Then there was silence. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the contractor came back up, his face grey. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. The air in the crawl space was thick and rancid. Like mildew and old meat. Behind the false wall, barely wide enough to crawl through, was a narrow passage, just a few feet deep. At the end of it, a crude bedroll. A plastic jug. A bucket. A stack of granola bar wrappers. A single, tattered coat. And scrawled on the plaster with what looked like charcoal. "I didn't mean to stay this long." Police were called. They swarmed the house for hours. Crime scene tape. Questions. Flashlights scanning every crevice. Neighbors watching from behind drawn curtains. But they didn't find anyone. Not right away. Whoever had been living inside their walls, because that's what this was, had vanished. Slipped away. Through a vent. A panel. A tunnel. It was real. Not a ghost. Not a feeling. A person. He had lived there. Hidden. Watched. Listened. Moved when they slept. Written in the diary. Scratched at the drywall. It all made sense now. The cold drafts. The missing snacks. The odd objects that would disappear and reappear in strange places. Even the dog's behavior, Bruno had known long before they did. In the weeks that followed, the house was torn apart. Every wall checked, every panel opened. The police said the man, whoever he was, had likely lived there for years, maybe on and off. There was talk of a former tenant. A name. No clear record. Nothing definitive. Only that someone had once rented the property long before the family moved in, and possibly, somehow, never left. They never caught him. Sometimes, MIA would sit by the old vent near her bed and just listen. She knew he was gone. She did. But part of her couldn't stop thinking about him, about how deep someone's loneliness or desperation would have to run to drive them into the walls of a house. To become a secret. A shadow. A ghost without needing to die. She never read the diary again. She buried it beneath the floorboards in the hidden room, sealing it shut with nails and boards. But still, on cold nights, she sometimes swore she could hear it, that faint, rhythmic scratching. Not like an animal. More like a reminder. That some people don't haunt a place because they died there. They haunt it because it's the only place they were ever seen.